Okay, in this video we're going to take a look at how you actually access the course content, and some of this stuff may seem a little bit circular to you because if you're watching this video you've already kind of figured out how to get to the content, but we're just going to go through things in a little bit more detail here. So obviously if we're looking at the main page here in the hub and we click on content up in the top menu there, we'll take to where you went before. This is the course introduction module here. You've probably already gone to start here and are now down here. Maybe you followed the link to the learning guide here, because I'll just talk about this for 1 second. If you click on this link, of course, it takes you to the overview for the current unit that you're working on. So this is the course introduction overview. And this gives you one way to get to the course content. If you wanted to see the section on accessing course content, of course, you could click on the link here and go to the Google Doc, which lists the information for this section, course content. So this is what we call the learning guide for this little topic of the course here. And we'll take a better look at some other, a more detailed learning guide in just a second here. So one way is through the links in the course tracking sheet and through those course overview pages, or the unit overview pages, sorry. There's the tracking sheet there, so you can follow those links to get to the individual learning guides as well. Now, if on the other hand, you come back here and let's just go back a little bit from that page, and of course you clicked on A, accessing course content, that takes you to a page here where you have another link to that same learning guide, and you can also see the video that you're currently watching right now. So this is the way most of the course pages are organized. You've got a link to the relevant section in Learning Guide, and you've got a video that covers some of that course content. So let's take a look at what this would look like in the first unit that you're actually going to be working on, Unit 1-2, okay, where we start looking at vectors. Now, you don't have access to this quite yet, but because I'm a teacher, of course, I can take us in here. So if we come into Unit 1-2 on geometric vectors, again, you can open up the link. That'll take you to the overview of the learning guide here, and you can see the expectations in here. The evaluations, so the assignments that you're going to submit, are listed up in the top right hand corner. Estimated time for how long you should be working on this, about 9 days, so this should take you about 2 weeks to complete. And again, you've got a list of all of the topics here: review of trigonometry, vectors, properties of vectors, and so on, as well as instructions for the things that you should be doing. So if we go to one particular section here, let's say we go to the first one you're going to be doing sort of new stuff in, vectors, properties of vectors, and scalar multiplication. So we could click on the link there. That would take us to the learning guide, but I'm going to go back here through the hub down to that section. So we're still in 1-2 geometric vectors here. Click on that down at the side, and I'm going to go in properties of vectors right here. Okay. So what you see when you come in here is, of course, the title. You see some basic learning goals here: learn the basic properties of vectors. Obviously enough. You've got another link to the learning guide, and then you've got a couple of lessons here posted on YouTube that you can watch that are going to cover the basic concepts out of this learning guide. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on the learning guide here, and it takes me into the learning guide, again in Google Doc format here, which has a lot of content that you can read through. Okay, which some examples that you can look at. Okay, examples that relate to the kinds of questions you're going to be asked to do later. You can keep reading through. Some cases there are little places where there are questions along where you can fill in your answers, or you could put your answers down on another sheet of paper if you're more comfortable doing that. The answers to these practice questions, if we scroll way down to the end, are always at the very end of the learning guide. So here we have the answers to those questions on page B4 that I was pointing to earlier, and then we have the answers to the practice questions, which are always at the very end. Okay, so you'll get to the section here called practice questions, and there's a number of things that you should do in here, and then you can check your answers down here. So you've got two things. You've got these videos. I guess you've got three things. You've got the videos, you've got the learning guides, and then you've got the practice questions in the learning guides. And people will often ask, well, what should I do? Which one of these things should I do? Well, basically you should look at all three of these things. What I would recommend is starting off by looking at watching the video. That'll give you kind of an overview of what is going to be in the learning guide and the sorts of things that you have to do. In those lessons, I also do sort of specific examples, so it can kind of be helpful to see me do a problem first and explain how I got the answer before you tackle those problems yourself. After watching the lessons, I would then go into the learning guide here, and you don't need to, if you understood everything that was in the lesson, you don't need to read all of the content that is here in the learning guide. You should take a look at the examples and just make sure you understand how their examples are working, because usually they're different than the examples that I did in the lesson. And the more examples you see, the more you're going to understand. Then I would tackle the practice questions down towards the end. If you do really, really well in the practice questions, you find them easy, you're checking your answers and you're getting everything right, then awesome, you understand everything. If you're finding something a little bit tricky, that's where you might want to go back and see if there's an example in the learning guide, or read a little section of text in the learning guide to see if you can find something that's going to help you understand that question a little bit better. If you've gone back through the lesson, the video lesson, and you've gone back through the learning guide and you're still having trouble with a question, which might happen because not everything that's in these practice questions is going to be covered in the lessons or in the learning guide. Sometimes you have to sort of apply the knowledge to a new situation. At that point, you could post a question in the class lounge asking if anybody else has a solution to this question or asking what's going on, or you could email me a question and I could give you a little bit of help. Now, in some cases in these learning guides, there aren't any in this one here, but in some cases, when you come down to the answers, there'll be a little link that you can see that'll say help with question number 5, or sometimes next to the question there'll be a little link that says hint. If you click on those links, that'll often take you to a little video where I go through an explanation for that question, or I go through a little explanation of what that question actually means. So that's another place that will sometimes be available for help. So a lot of times what happens is if a student has emailed me a question about one of these questions that they're being asked to do, I will put together a little video on the solution to that question and I'll post it back in the learning guide so that other students can access it later on. Okay, so that's how I think you should sort of approach the learning guides and the lessons and things like that. What I don't advise you doing is taking a look at the assignment at the end of the unit and then just figuring out how to do those individual questions, because that won't prepare you for the exam that you're going to have to write at the end of the course. Or sorry, at the midterm in this case, because there are a wide variety of questions that I can ask you on these concepts that we're going to be learning here. So in order to get a full understanding of all of the concepts that we're going to cover in the course, you have to do as many different kinds of practice questions as you can. And that's going to involve doing them section by section by section. Okay? That's all.